The funniest part, my friend Jason said with a grin I should have recognized as trouble, is that Ethan has absolutely no idea what's waiting for him. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the laughter around that table. There were 6 of us sitting in a crowded downtown steakhouse on a Thursday night, the kind of place where people celebrated promotions and closed business deals over expensive dinners. My friends had known me for years, long before I became the CEO of a growing software company. And if there was one thing they never got tired of, it was reminding me that I was still single at 38. Every dinner somehow turned into the same conversation. They would ask why I worked so much, joke that I was married to my company, and place imaginary bets on whether I would ever settle down. Usually I laughed along with them. That night felt different. Jason leaned forward and slid his phone across the table. "We found someone for you," he announced. The rest of the group immediately started smirking. "Found someone?" I asked. "A date," another friend said. "Tomorrow night." I shook my head. No chance. That answer only made them more excited. They spent the next 10 minutes trying to convince me, throwing out every argument they could think of. According to them, I needed to get out more. I needed a life outside work. I needed to stop analyzing every relationship like it was a business acquisition. Eventually, mostly because I was tired of hearing about it, I agreed. The entire table erupted in cheers that seemed strangely overdramatic for a simple blind date. "What's her name?" I asked. Jason took a sip of water before answering. "Olivia." That was all they would tell me. Every follow-up question was met with vague answers and suspicious smiles. By the time dinner ended, I had a reservation time, a restaurant address, and a growing feeling that something was off. The next afternoon, the group chat became unusually active. Messages kept appearing. "Good luck tonight. Don't leave too fast. Remember to keep an open mind." The comments seemed odd, but I ignored them. My day was packed with meetings, budget reviews, and investor calls. Still, every now and then, I caught myself thinking about the date. Not because I was excited, because I was curious. That evening, after changing into a navy blazer and driving 20 minutes across the city, I pulled into the restaurant parking lot. The place was small and welcoming, far less upscale than the locations my friends usually preferred. As I stepped out of my car, my phone buzzed again. Jason had sent one final message. It simply read, "This is going to be unforgettable." At the time, I thought it was another joke. I had no idea that somewhere nearby, my friends were already watching, convinced they knew exactly how the night would end. I checked my reflection in the restaurant window before walking inside, more out of habit than nervousness. The hostess greeted me with a smile and asked for my name. The moment I said it, something flickered across her face, almost like recognition. She glanced toward a corner table near the back of the room. "Your party is already here," she said. As I followed her through the restaurant, I noticed a woman sitting alone by the window. She was not scrolling through her phone or staring impatiently at the entrance like most people waiting for a blind date. Instead, she was quietly reading a paperback book. When the hostess stopped beside the table, the woman looked up and offered a polite smile. "Ethan?" she asked. "Olivia?" I replied. She nodded. "Nice to meet you." There was something refreshingly normal about her. No dramatic introduction. No awkward attempt to impress me. Just genuine kindness. I sat down, and for the first few minutes, the conversation felt surprisingly easy. Then I started noticing things. Every now and then, Olivia glanced toward the opposite side of the restaurant. At first I thought nothing of it, but after the third or fourth time, I casually followed her gaze. Near the bar area, partially hidden behind a decorative divider, I spotted a familiar face. Jason. The second I recognized him, he quickly looked away. My stomach sank. A few feet away sat 2 more friends pretending to focus on their drinks. Suddenly, the strange messages, the laughter at dinner, and the exaggerated excitement all started making sense. This was not just a blind date. It was entertainment. For them. I felt embarrassment rising in my chest. Not because of Olivia, but because I realized I had walked straight into whatever joke they had planned. Before I could decide what to do, Olivia slowly placed her menu on the table. "You figured it out, did you not?" she asked. Her voice was calm. I blinked. Figured what out? A small smile appeared on her face, though it did not reach her eyes. That we are both part of someone else's idea of a funny story. For a moment, I did not know what to say. She glanced toward the bar and then back at me. "One of your friends contacted my cousin a week ago. She thought she was helping." I only learned the details this afternoon. I stared at her. You knew? Not at first, she said. But eventually it became obvious. She gave a quiet laugh. Apparently, I am supposed to be the surprise. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. There was no anger, no bitterness, just disappointment. For the first time that evening, I saw how uncomfortable this situation must have been for her. While I had spent the last 24 hours wondering whether my friends were planning a prank, she had spent hers knowing she might be walking into one. Olivia reached for her purse. Honestly, I was about to leave before you arrived. She stood halfway from her chair. I think we can both agree this was a mistake. For a second, I simply looked at her. Most people in that situation would have walked away without hesitation. Honestly, they probably should have. But as Olivia reached for her purse, I found myself thinking less about my friends and more about the woman standing in front of me. She had every reason to be frustrated, yet she had remained polite. She had every reason to make a scene, yet she had chosen dignity instead. That alone made her different from many people I had met. Wait, I said. Olivia paused. Why? She asked. It was a fair question. I glanced toward the bar where my friends were pretending not to watch. The second they saw me looking, one of them nearly spilled his drink while turning away. I shook my head. Because if we leave now, they win. Olivia followed my gaze and immediately understood. For the first time that evening, a genuine smile appeared on her face. That is your reason? Partly. She crossed her arms. And the other part? I thought about it for a moment. The other part is that during the first 10 minutes of this conversation, you were the most honest person I have spoken to all week. Her expression softened slightly. That is either very flattering or very concerning. Probably both, I admitted. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. It was the first time she seemed relaxed. After a few seconds, she slowly sat back down. 1 hour, she said. What? I will stay for 1 hour. Then I reserve the right to escape. Fair enough. We ordered dinner, and something unexpected happened. The awkwardness started disappearing. Without the pressure of trying to impress each other, the conversation became surprisingly real. Olivia worked as an office administrator for a local nonprofit organization. She spoke about her job with genuine enthusiasm, even though it clearly was not glamorous work. She cared about helping people. She cared about making a difference. Most importantly, she cared about doing the right thing even when nobody noticed. That mindset fascinated me because it was so different from the world I spent most of my time in. Eventually, she asked about my career. When I mentioned running a software company, she did not react the way people usually did. There was no sudden excitement, no questions about money, no visible change in attitude. She simply nodded and asked whether I enjoyed what I did. The simplicity of the question caught me off guard. Most people wanted to know how successful the company was. Olivia wanted to know whether I was happy. Sometimes, I answered honestly. That sounds like a complicated answer. It is. Then maybe you should work on that. I laughed. You do not waste much time, do you? Life is short, she replied. The way she said it carried weight. Not sadness. Experience. For the next 30 minutes, I almost forgot about the people watching from across the room. Almost. Because every now and then, I would catch one of them glancing over, waiting for the joke to unfold. What none of them seemed to realize was that the joke had already failed. The woman they expected me to dismiss was quickly becoming the most interesting person in the restaurant. By the time our meals arrived, the 1-hour deadline Olivia had jokingly imposed no longer seemed relevant. The conversation had taken on a life of its own. What surprised me most was how little she talked about herself unless I asked directly. In a world where people constantly tried to present polished versions of their lives, Olivia seemed almost uncomfortable being the center of attention. That only made me more curious. Can I ask you something? I said. You already are, she replied with a smile. Fair point. Earlier, when you said life is short, it sounded like there was a story behind that. For the first time that evening, she hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the window where the city lights reflected against the glass. I immediately regretted asking. You do not have to answer. She looked back at me and offered a small nod. No, it is okay. There was a brief silence before she continued. My husband passed away 9 years ago. The words were simple and calm, but their weight landed heavily. I am sorry, I said quietly. Thank you. She took a sip of water before continuing. Noah was not even a year old at the time. I felt my chest tighten. Until that moment, I had known she was a single mother, but I had not known the story behind it. Olivia never asked for sympathy. She never dramatized anything. She simply explained the facts. She talked about learning how to navigate life alone while raising a baby. She talked about working multiple jobs in the early years. She talked about sleepless nights, budgeting every dollar, and constantly worrying whether she was making the right decisions. Yet somehow, every challenge she described was followed by something she had learned from it. There was no bitterness in her voice, no resentment, just resilience. "I almost went back to school," she said at one point. "Almost. I was accepted into a graduate program." "What happened?" She smiled. "Noah happened." "You gave it up?" "Not really." She thought for a moment. "I made a choice." That answer stayed with me. Most people would have described it as a sacrifice. Olivia described it as a choice. There was a difference. One implied loss. The other implied purpose. As she spoke, I found myself comparing her outlook to the complaints I heard every day from people whose lives were objectively easier. Some people with every advantage imaginable still found reasons to be unhappy. Olivia had faced obstacles most would struggle to imagine, yet she carried herself with gratitude. Eventually, I asked her whether she ever regretted putting so much of her life on hold. She laughed softly. Every parent probably wonders about the roads they did not take. And then Noah smiles at me, and suddenly the question does not seem very important anymore. There was something extraordinary about the way she said it. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was completely sincere. Across the restaurant, my friends were probably still waiting for me to realize I had been set up with the wrong person. What they could not see was that every minute I spent listening to Olivia only convinced me of the opposite. The more I learned about her, the more obvious it became that she was not the punchline of anyone's joke. She was the strongest person in the room. The waitress had just cleared our plates when Olivia glanced at her phone and her expression immediately changed. It was subtle, but I noticed it. The relaxed smile faded and was replaced by concern. "Everything okay?" I asked. She looked at the screen for another second before nodding. "Yes, at least I think so." She slipped the phone back into her purse. "My neighbor is watching Noah tonight." "Your son?" She smiled. "Yes, he is 8 now." There was a warmth in her voice whenever she mentioned him that was impossible to miss. "I should probably head home soon. It is a school night." I checked the time and realized nearly 2 hours had passed. So much for the 1-hour limit. "Thank you for staying," I said. Olivia laughed. "You make it sound like a hostage negotiation. Considering how this evening started, I think we both deserve credit." She shook her head, still smiling. Then her phone buzzed again. This time she looked genuinely surprised. A moment later she stood up. "Actually, there is something I need to do." "Everything all right?" "My neighbor forgot she had an appointment and needs to drop Noah off here for a few minutes while she handles it." She looked embarrassed. "I am sorry. I know this is awkward." "Why would it be awkward?" "Because this is not exactly how first dates usually go." "I am not exactly having a usual first date." That earned another laugh. About 10 minutes later, a woman entered the restaurant with a young boy beside her. The second Olivia saw him, her entire face lit up. It was the kind of smile that could not be faked. Noah spotted his mother and immediately hurried over. "Mom!" He wrapped his arms around her, and she hugged him back. Watching them together revealed more about Olivia than anything she had told me all evening. Noah turned and noticed me. For a moment, he looked uncertain. Olivia gently rested a hand on his shoulder. "Noah, this is Ethan." The boy extended his hand without hesitation. "Nice to meet you, sir." I blinked in surprise before shaking it. "Nice to meet you too. Mom says good manners matter," he explained. "She is right." He nodded seriously, as though confirming an important fact. The conversation that followed lasted only a few minutes, but it left a bigger impression on me than I expected. Noah was polite without seeming rehearsed, confident without being rude, curious about everything. At one point, he noticed a small model rocket displayed near the restaurant entrance and launched into an enthusiastic explanation about space exploration. Olivia listened patiently, clearly having heard the same facts many times before. Instead of looking exhausted, she looked proud. When Noah finally wandered a few feet away to admire the display more closely, I found myself smiling. "He is a good kid," I said quietly. Olivia's expression softened. "He really is." In that moment, I understood something important. The qualities I admired in Noah had not appeared by accident. They reflected the person who had spent years raising him. And somehow, That realization made me respect Olivia even more than I already did. After Noah's neighbor returned and exchanged a few words with Olivia, it was finally time to leave. Noah thanked me for talking with him about rockets, then followed his mother toward the restaurant entrance. Before she stepped outside, Olivia turned back toward me. "Thank you for being kind tonight," she said. The sentence caught me off guard because from my perspective, she was the one who had made the evening worthwhile. "Thank you for staying," I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Noah looked up at her and asked if they could stop for ice cream on the way home. Olivia laughed and told him it was a school night. The two of them disappeared through the front door a few seconds later. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the empty entrance. Then I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, that did not go the way I expected. I turned around to find Jason and the rest of my friends approaching from the bar area. They were grinning, but there was uncertainty behind the smiles, almost as if they were trying to figure out whether the joke had succeeded. "How long have you been standing there?" I asked. "Long enough," Jason said. "You stayed way longer than we thought." Another friend laughed. "We had a pool going. Nobody picked 2.5 hours." I stared at them. The more they talked, the less amusing the situation felt. "You were taking bets?" "Relax," Jason said. "It was harmless." Harmless. The word bothered me more than it should have. Maybe because I kept thinking about Olivia walking into that restaurant knowing people expected her to be the punchline. Maybe because I kept thinking about Noah shaking my hand and proudly talking about space exploration. Or maybe because for the first time, I was seeing my friend's behavior through someone else's eyes. What exactly was supposed to be funny? I asked. The group exchanged glances. "Come on," one of them finally said. "You know?" "No," I replied. "Actually, I do not." The confidence around the table seemed to fade. Jason shrugged. "We just thought you would leave after 5 minutes." "Why?" Another pause. "Because she is a single mom," someone said. The sentence hung in the air. I looked at each of them. Successful professionals. Educated adults. People I had known for years. Yet somehow none of them seemed embarrassed by what they had just admitted. "You know what is interesting?" I said. "I spent the entire evening talking to someone with more character, resilience, and honesty than most people I meet in a month." Nobody responded. "And somehow you thought she was the joke." The silence became uncomfortable. A few of them looked away. Jason cleared his throat. "Wait, you actually liked her?" I almost laughed at the question. Liked her? As if that were the surprising part. "Yes," I said. "I did." The looks on their faces were priceless. It was as though they had spent weeks planning a prank only to discover they had completely misunderstood the situation. And as I walked toward the parking lot that night, I realized something unexpected. The most surprising part of the evening was not that I had enjoyed the date. It was that I genuinely hoped it would not be the last time I saw Olivia. The next morning, I told myself I would wait a few days before reaching out to Olivia. That plan lasted until lunchtime. By 12:30, I had already reread our text conversation 3 times, trying to come up with a message that sounded normal. Eventually, I gave up and sent the truth. I told her I had enjoyed meeting her and asked whether she would be interested in having coffee sometime the following week. The reply arrived 15 minutes later. Simple, friendly, genuine. She said yes. Over the next several weeks, coffee turned into dinner, dinner turned into long conversations, and long conversations turned into something neither of us had expected. What impressed me most was that Olivia never tried to fit into my world. She did not pretend to care about business meetings or corporate events. She remained exactly who she was from the beginning. Honest, grounded, unapologetically herself. The more time we spent together, the more I admired that. Meanwhile, my friends remained convinced the situation would eventually fade away. Every time someone asked about Olivia, they did it with the same skeptical tone, as though they were waiting for me to come to my senses. Instead, the opposite happened. One afternoon, my company began preparing for its annual community partnership event. It was one of the biggest gatherings we hosted each year, bringing together employees, local organizations, and community leaders. Hundreds of people attended. During a planning meeting, someone mentioned inviting representatives from several nonprofit groups. Immediately, I thought of Olivia. A few days later, I called her. "I have a question," I said. "That sounds dangerous," she replied. "There is an event coming up next month. I already hear a sales pitch. Will you let me finish?" She laughed. "Go ahead." I explained the purpose of the event and asked whether her organization would like to participate. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You are serious?" she asked. "Of course I am serious. You want our nonprofit there?" "I do." Another pause followed. "Most people barely know we exist." "Then that seems like a good reason to change that." When the evening of the event finally arrived, the ballroom was filled with conversations, presentations, and networking. Olivia arrived carrying materials from her organization and looked slightly overwhelmed by the size of the crowd. "You did not mention there would be this many people," she said. "If I had, would you have come?" She smiled. "Probably not." Throughout the night, I introduced her to employees, business partners, and community leaders. To nobody's surprise except perhaps her own, people loved talking to her. She connected with everyone, not because she was trying to impress them, but because she genuinely cared about people. Across the room, I noticed Jason watching the interactions unfold. The confusion on his face was impossible to miss. He had expected a joke. Instead, he was watching Olivia become one of the most respected people in the building. And for the first time, I made no effort to hide how proud I was to stand beside her. As the evening continued, Olivia became one of the busiest people in the ballroom. What started as a small information table for her nonprofit quickly turned into a gathering point for guests who wanted to learn more about the programs her organization offered. I watched as she spoke with business owners, community leaders, and employees from my company. Every conversation seemed to end the same way. People walked away impressed, not because she was trying to sell them something, but because they could immediately tell she believed in what she was doing. At one point, the executive director of a regional foundation spent nearly 20 minutes speaking with her. Another guest asked whether her organization would consider partnering on a future community project. By the end of the night, Olivia had collected more contacts than some of the professional networking consultants we hired. The most interesting part was that she seemed completely unaware of the effect she was having. During a short break, she walked over to where I was standing and quietly asked, "Is everyone always this nice at your events?" I laughed. "No." She looked genuinely confused. "Then why does it feel like people keep thanking me?" "Because they are." "For what?" "For reminding them that there are things more important than quarterly reports." She rolled her eyes. "That sounds suspiciously dramatic." "It also happens to be true." Before she could respond, Jason approached. I had known him long enough to recognize when he felt uncomfortable. He extended his hand toward Olivia. "I do not think we have officially met. I am Jason." Olivia shook his hand politely. "Nice to meet you." There was an awkward pause. Then something happened that I never expected. Jason cleared his throat and looked directly at her. "I owe you an apology." Olivia blinked. "For what?" "For making assumptions." The honesty surprised all three of us. He glanced briefly at me before continuing. "Actually, a lot of assumptions." Olivia's expression softened. "Well, thank you for saying that. You handled the situation better than I would have." Jason gave a small laugh. "Much better." After he walked away, Olivia looked at me. That seemed important. It was. Because it was not only Jason. Over the following weeks, the attitude of my entire friend group began to change. The people who had once treated Olivia like a punchline now treated her with genuine respect. Some volunteered at her nonprofit's events. Others donated resources or professional services. A few even admitted they were embarrassed by their original behavior. The truth had become impossible to ignore. The qualities they valued most in people were the same qualities Olivia had possessed from the very beginning. They had simply failed to see them. One Saturday afternoon, several months later, our group gathered for a backyard barbecue. As I stood near the grill talking with friends, I noticed Noah teaching two grown adults how to launch a model rocket safely. He was giving instructions with the seriousness of a mission commander. Everyone listened. Olivia stood nearby, smiling. Jason leaned toward me and shook his head. "You know what the worst part is?" he said. "What?" "We really thought we understood the situation." He looked across the yard at Olivia and Noah. "Turns out we were the fools the entire time." About a year after that first dinner, I found myself sitting on a wooden bench at a local park while Noah tested the newest model rocket in his growing collection. The afternoon sun was beginning to settle lower in the sky, and the field was filled with families enjoying the weekend. It was one of those ordinary moments that somehow felt important. Noah had grown taller. Olivia had become an even bigger part of my life than I could have imagined. And somewhere along the way, what started as an unexpected conversation had turned into something that felt like home. "You are distracted," Olivia said as she sat beside me. Am I that obvious? Only to someone who knows you. I smiled. That answer alone said more than she probably realized. There had been no grand turning point over the past year. No dramatic event that changed everything overnight. Instead, there had been hundreds of small moments. Morning coffee before work, volunteer events with her nonprofit, school projects with Noah, long conversations after difficult days. The kind of moments that quietly build a life. Can I tell you something? I asked. Olivia looked at me curiously. That depends on how serious your voice is about to become. I laughed. Fair warning. It is serious. Noah was busy setting up another launch several yards away, completely focused on his project. I took a breath. A year ago, I thought success meant building the biggest company possible. Olivia remained silent, listening. Then I met someone who reminded me that success is also about who you come home to. Her eyes softened immediately. Ethan, let me finish. She smiled and nodded. You changed my life, Olivia. Not because you tried to. Not because you planned to. Just by being exactly who you are. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of children playing echoed across the park. A gentle breeze moved through the trees overhead. It felt strangely fitting that such an important conversation was happening during such a normal afternoon. And Noah changed my life too, I continued. He probably changed mine first, she said quietly. Maybe. I looked toward the field where he was proudly preparing another launch. The point is, I cannot imagine my future without either of you in it. Olivia blinked several times as emotion filled her eyes. What are you saying? She asked softly. I smiled. I am saying that I do not just want to be part of your life when it is convenient. I want to be there for the ordinary days, the difficult days, the exciting days, all of it. Before she could respond, a familiar voice interrupted us. Ready for launch, Noah shouted from across the field. We both laughed. A few seconds later, the rocket lifted into the air, climbing higher and higher against the blue sky. As we watched it rise, Olivia reached for my hand. She did not need to say anything else. In that moment, I realized the greatest surprise was never the date itself. It was discovering that the person everyone underestimated turned out to be the person who taught me what truly mattered. And as the rocket drifted safely back to Earth, surrounded by the people who meant the most to me, I knew I was exactly where I belonged.